The second ever pumpkin jam has come to a close, and the results are in. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, the pumpkin jam is basically like a game jam, but everybody makes 3D printable models instead of video games. People sign up, and then at the start of the event, they get an email with the theme of the contest. And then, with the guidance of a provided tutorial video, they have to come up with, design, and then upload a 3D printable model that fits with the theme of the contest, all within 48 hours. And this time, the theme was length. And of the 11 folks who signed up, 6 of them were able to make it out the other side and successfully upload the model. And now it is time for me to judge which one is the best. Now, everyone was tasked with making a model that was over 48 centimeters long. And while I haven't actually printed any of them out as of recording this, I do want to add that while the actual design and creativity of each model is important, I also stress the importance that each model should be very sturdy. Accordingly, I will also be paying very close attention to whether or not they can stand up to a decently high amount of abuse. For example, let's take my entry as the judge.
The Spooky Sword by Carl the Pumpkin Man is a Halloween-themed sword and sheath combo. It's got a batwing crossguard, an eyeball gem, a pumpkin pommel, and a sheath with vampire fangs biting into what becomes a pool of blood. The fangs even allow for it to be hung up on a provided hanger or threaded onto a belt. Putting it together was rather smooth. The instructions were clear, and the few places where you could even physically put something in the wrong orientation or in the wrong order were clearly marked in the instructions. However, due to the support scarring, the eyes were a bit too tight-fitting, and because you couldn't push them down all the way, they blocked the bat wings from meeting in the middle. Making the holes in the eyes just a little bit bigger and adding fillets to the base would help it pop on easier, I feel. The most interesting things, however, are the orange parts on the blade and the red parts on the side of the sheath. Because they span the joints of the parts that they are attached to, they effectively add more strength by clamping the pieces together. And it shows. You can swing them around pretty forcefully and they don't even creak. Pretty cool. Now for the cat test. How would it stand up to a mischievous cat knocking it off the table? Oh, shoot. Maybe I should put some cardboard down. Overall, despite a pain point or two with the assembly, the Spooky Sword is a very solid model, both figuratively and literally, with a decent amount of detail given the fact it was made within 48 hours. Good job! Okay, so I hope that gave you a good idea of exactly how I will be judging the models and what exactly I will be looking for in my assessments. So without further ado, let's work our way up to the victor. The Jaro Tappo lightsaber by J-Ro is apparently based on the design of the personal lightsaber of Jaro Tappo before it is broken and handed to his Padawan, Cal Kestis, who repairs it and uses it as a single-bladed saber in the game Star Wars Jedi: The Fallen Order. Whew. I say apparently because I've never actually played the game, and I just know how to wiki stuff. But this was a pretty fun piece to put together. It reminded me of making my own beaded necklace. Essentially, it consists of a long core that you screw the end piece on, and then you thread on all other pieces in succession. Finally, screwing the last piece on locks everything in place. The screws are split in half and printed flat, which means that they most likely won't split if you screw something on a bit too tight. You have to be careful though, because I actually paired the wrong ones up, which meant that I almost built the entire thing with the first piece screwed on cockeyed. As for the instructions, they reminded me a lot of building a Lego set. They consist of really clear images showing exactly what piece goes on in what order. And while technically, if you follow the instructions to a T, there is no room for ambiguity, it's really easy to accidentally put a piece on wrong. After all, the long core is a perfect square prism, which means that any given piece has 8 different ways it can be put on, 4 different rotations on both sides. Now, this doesn't matter for some of the pieces as they are symmetrical in all ways, but some of them aren't, which can make it really easy to put the right piece on the wrong way. The couple times I noticed I did this, I had to take off everything that I had put on after that, fix it, and then put everything back on. In order to fix this, I'd recommend modeling a spine down the length of the core, and then putting unique nubs and holes in the faces of the actual pieces to guarantee that they only have one way that they can fit into each other. Another difficult part of the assembly was that the screwed-in pieces were the only ones that were actually physically secured to the core. So if you hold it by any other piece, including these silver shield thingies, they have a habit of sliding around on the core, which is especially bad when you consider that not all pieces actually wrap around the core, and instead are just sandwiched between other pieces that do. So if the pieces you put on do slide around at all, those sandwiched pieces tend to fall out. These pieces in particular were really difficult to balance in there and prevent from falling out, unfortunately, but somewhat confusingly, immediately after you finish constructing that section, you cover it up with this grip here. So to be honest, I'm not sure why it's necessary to build all of that like that when it's not even visible in the final product. I know it might be a case of trying to make it as accurate to the real model as possible, but personally, since it's not visible, I would either just make that grip piece a solid core or make it so that somehow the middle is visible, because it's actually a really cool part of the design and it's kind of a shame that it's covered up. Now, I mentioned before that it would help to add tabs and slots to make the pieces easier to assemble, but it would also help to make the entire model more sturdy. It's not fragile by any stretch of the imagination, but because there is some space between the inner core and the pieces to allow you to slide them on, you can bend it a little bit, even after it's entirely finished. Having tight-fitting joints in between the individual pieces can help to rectify that issue. Now that I think about it, there are quite a few pieces in there that I think could be stacked on top of each other and printed at the same time, even though they're different colors. You can just add a pause in between the parts and have the user swap the filament out to print both of them at the same time, even though they are different colors. Anyway, cat test time. Okay, dang. I did put some glue in here to try to make it feel sturdier, and I think the glue did break, but the pieces are fine. Overall, I think this is a really creative idea, and I especially love how the core slots together to create a really sturdy but slick-looking design. I know this has been done before, but you could potentially make a bunch of unique individual parts and then release it as a build-your-own lightsaber, where people could essentially treat this like a beaded necklace and make their own. However, I do need to address the fact that this model has not received a ranking. And that has something to do with how I introduced it. If you'll remember, this lightsaber is essentially a double-bladed version of Cal Kestis's lightsaber. So, if you already had a pre-modeled version of Cal Kestis's lightsaber, it would be relatively simple to just chop the handle off and then copy the other side over to make this one. And the thing is, J-Ro has indeed already made a Cal Kestis lightsaber. So I contacted J-Ro about this, and they told me that essentially they took the pumpkin jam as an opportunity to revamp the Cal Kestis lightsaber, remodeling it from the ground up in order to create this one. And while I definitely can appreciate that, I felt like making a model so heavily based off of one that you've already made goes against the spirit of the pumpkin jam. So we compromised. Since they went through the lengths of making it and entering it into the jam, I would still include it in the video and review it. However, it wouldn't be eligible to win the prize. Oh, and I updated the rules to be much clearer about this sort of thing. So, sorry for the hassle, but on to the 5th place model. Alright, before I say anything about this actual model, I have to say something else first. Namely, Ubermeisters himself contacted me soon after the contest ended and let me know that because he only had a few hours during the contest to actually try and make this, he didn't have a chance to check how it all came together. And then when he did, it really wasn't up to his standards. Now, initially, he told me to just not bother printing it, but since he went through the effort to enter it, I figured I would give it a try anyway and talk about it. So I did exclude one of the pieces that he said just didn't fit with the other ones, but the rest of it I did print out and try to make. So, the tall LED tree lamp by Ubermeisters is a rather alien-looking tree lamp that is designed to be used with the Bamboo Lab lamp kit. I happen to have one myself, but it's kind of stuck, so I guess I won't be able to try it out with this one. It is intended to be printed with clear PETG, and if this 3D render is any indication, it's supposed to light up and glow when it's turned on. It also has a drawer down below in the base that is supposed to hold heavy stuff to keep it upright, but that was the part I told just didn't fit at all, so I didn't bother printing it. Also, I'd like to add that this is my first time ever printing anything substantial with PETG, and I think I did the right thing in drying it beforehand, but then I procrastinated, and then I guess the outside kind of got wet again. So like the bottom was kind of compromised, but the rest looked fine, so let's proceed as we were. So when actually assembling it, I gotta say the orange pieces fit together really nicely. They snapped on easily, and while it was confusing to try to figure out which branch went where, they all had unique shapes, so it was impossible to put the wrong branch on the wrong place in the wrong orientation. Except for this one that was basically a perfect circle, so it was really difficult for me to figure out what orientation I was actually supposed to put it on. However, the same can't really be said about the green balls. While they also technically only had one place that they could fit on, it was really hard to try and figure out exactly which branch to put which one on, and especially what orientation they were supposed to go on. Furthermore, some of them just didn't seem to be able to meet all the way together, I think due to overhang defects on the orange branches. Another issue I ran into was support. I understand that with freeform sculptures like this, it's more or less unavoidable to have a lot of support, but still, it was a lot. The green balls had a lot to remove, and the branches themselves actually broke in one place when I was trying to snap the supports off. Which, granted, I did pay thousands of dollars to buy a printer with 2 nozzles, so I very much could have just printed all the supports in PLA, and I really should have done that, but not everybody has access to that technology. Anyway, the base itself had a lot of supports to remove, and it was a pain getting them all out. Also, I think due to how it's shaped, the top kind of shrank thermally and curled up, which caused the nozzle to scrape against it, and I was kind of afraid it would fail entirely. The base could really benefit from just being cut into 2 pieces and then joined with pegs or something. But the big question is, how sturdy is it? On to the cat test. Uh-oh. So, while the design is very much unique, maybe make sure it's stable and somewhere that the cat can't get to it. Oh, and I forgot to actually test if it works as a lamp, so let's shine this light inside. Okay, the light seems to be blocked at each joint, so it's not reaching all the way to the ends. I wonder if removing the material from the joints so that it is completely hollow would fix that. Overall, I know this was made in a lot shorter time span than everyone else, so of course it does have a lot of work that still needs to be done. But that being said, I gotta say, I really appreciate and like how unique this model was. This was definitely not the sort of thing I thought people would make when I released the theme, so style points for that. However, I can't really recommend that anyone print this model in its current state, unfortunately. But, Ubermeisters, if and when you finish this, hit me up. I'm genuinely interested in seeing how the actual finished final product shakes out. I would just need to figure out where the heck I would want to put it. The strong interlocking structure by the Polymer Smith is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a 4-piece assembly where you fit these 2 pieces together, and then you can use that to fit 2 other pieces together. And then you can rinse and repeat until it's as long as you want. I personally made it 4 units long in order to fit with the theme of the contest. Now, according to the description, this was a rather rushed job, but honestly, for just a proof of context, I really don't have much to complain about here. The pieces fit together firmly enough that there is a really solid connection between parts, but not so solid that you struggle inserting them, and it creates a really strong joint between the parts, even without glue. Although, of course, glue helps. Now, in the description, I was told that they were unable to bend or break the assembly at all, so I took that as a challenge. And after a ridiculous amount of effort, I was indeed successful. So obviously, as this is a very simple print, there's not much I can say other than good job. Well, I can say something, and that is specifically, I'm wondering about filament usage and weight. Like, if you did make this the entire length of a wizard staff, like they proposed doing in the description, I wonder how much filament that would take and how heavy it would be. And if you do that, would it start sagging easily under its own weight? I don't know. Cat test! Okay, wasn't expecting anything different, and I hope you weren't either. Overall, this is a very good concept, and I look forward to seeing what you do with it in the future. But for now, I think this is a good placement for it. The fully printable bow tie stool by Mitch Cerrone uses these little bow tie shapes to lock all of the pieces together. It went together fairly smoothly, but I will say that because the bow ties are all symmetrical, it is possible to accidentally put the pieces on in the wrong direction, which I almost did. Also, while you only need a little glue to prevent the pieces from sliding past each other once it's built, I highly recommend you do it on a flat surface so that all of the pieces are flush with each other when the glue dries. But enough about that, I want to stand on it. So here's me on a full stomach at the end of the day, and here's me standing on the edges, and here's me standing on one foot smack dab in the center. Now, you may have noticed a popping on the parts, and as far as I can tell, that was just the super glue giving way. The actual joints themselves have held up, albeit a little bent. Now, you have to make sure to print the bow ties laying down on your build plates. If you print them standing up, they will most likely snap along the layer lines if you try to do this. However, even if you do that, there will still be some bending involved. As you can see, my body weight pressing down on it, along with the angle of the legs, causes a twisting motion that pulls the bottom of the joints apart. So here's what I would do to help improve the design. First, I would make it so that the bow ties can only be loaded in from the back, and that there would be a back plate on the surface to prevent them from going all the way through, like this. That way, it'd be impossible to assemble incorrectly. The pieces would always be lined up properly, and you would have a lot more touching surface area to put glue on. The only downside is that you would have a smaller joint and therefore less strength, but given that the most tension is being put on the bottom and not the top, I don't think you'd be sacrificing much. This is also total speculation on my part, but I wonder if you put a U-shaped part, like right here, if that would increase the stability of it or not. Anyway, here's the cat test. It is unsurprisingly fine. To sum up my thoughts, the fully printable bow tie stool is an effective, albeit simple way to show how you can orient 3D printed parts to make a very strong assembly. Of course, I intentionally handicapped everyone by saying that they can only use PLA and super glue, so if you were trying to make something that was more effective, you of course would want to use more sturdy materials. So as such, while it is very impressive, the idea of using it as an actual stepping stool in real life is a bit scary. Obsidian Valor by Printcraft is a longsword themed presumably after the eponymous lava-formed glass. It's pretty darn long, and it features an obelisk-esque blade with an ornate hilt. Now, I gotta say, I'm a sucker for a good obsidian-themed blade, so when I started printing it, I was really excited to put it together. And assembly went down with little to no issue. There was even a GIF in the description of all of the parts being put together in sequence, which is an idea I will probably steal somewhere along the line. However, one issue that I had with the 3MF was that there are two plates with pegs on them, one of them just rotated 45 degrees from the other one, and you're only supposed to print one of those plates. It's not written directly in the instructions anywhere that you only need to print one of them. So someone like me who was trying to get everything done and just shoved everything on the same plate on the H2D didn't notice and ended up with 7 extra pegs in the end. But other than that, it was extremely clear where every piece was supposed to go. The peg holes, of course, helped to line things up, but there were also these numbers indented and bumped out of the parts that guaranteed that if you put things together incorrectly, you would absolutely notice. Somebody watched the tutorial video now, didn't they? There's even an extra bonus to the strength here where the middle pegs are a little bit offset from the side ones so that there is no part along the entire length of the blade that doesn't have a peg running through it. However, I do got some good news and I got some bad news. The good news is that most of the things I'm about to complain about seemingly have already been addressed and fixed, at least according to the description in the current version of the model. The bad news is that I downloaded and printed the older unfixed model, and I will be presenting and judging that one. So the first thing I noticed was that the blade pieces didn't touch all the way, and presumably that is because the bumped out numbers or the pegs are just a little bit too long. In general, it's always a good idea to back off the ends of these by about 0.4 millimeters or so, just to make sure that any drooping filament or something at the tops of the holes don't get in the way of preventing your pieces from joining fully. The second thing I noticed was that there was a little bit too much room between all of the pieces. See, sizing pegs is a little bit like The Price is Right. If you make them too thick, they won't be able to fit in the holes you need them to fit into, and you just won't be able to assemble your model. But if you make them too thin, well, you'll be able to assemble it, but there's a few reasons why loose-fitting parts aren't ideal. The first is that, well, this. It makes the assembly all rattly. Another issue is that the pieces will be really difficult to superglue together effectively. If you're familiar with superglue, you know that it's not viscous at all, and therefore it really likes to get wicked along layer lines. Because of this, it flattens out, so unless two surfaces are directly touching, it's really hard to get the glue to span the gap and hold the pieces together. And even if it does span the gap, superglue is really brittle, so it might just snap, crumble, and fall apart anyway. Personally, I offset all of the faces of pegs by negative 0.075 millimeters, and I offset all the faces of the inside of the crossguard where the blade goes in by negative 0.05 millimeters for a nice, snug fit. But, despite all this, does it survive the cat test? Came out mostly okay, except for the pommel here, of course. Although I'm not too surprised, the pommel and the handle weren't joined by an actual peg, so of course it's not as strong as the pieces that actually are. Now, in conclusion, I know I've said a lot of negative things about this model, but I want to say that I really do like it. I just view it as kind of a banana split without the ice cream, right? Still good, but there is a massive flaw that, although easily rectifiable, is still a massive flaw. And honestly, it seems like Printcraft has rectified those issues. So if you're interested in printing it out, I still would recommend it. I trust they've fixed it up. But now, the moment we've all been waiting for, the grand prize winner of the second Pumpkin Jam theme length is, drumroll please, the Alolan Executor Planter by Shadow Dio-sama. This model is based off of the Pokemon of the same name, and it features a little pot that you can put a plant in on top, which emulates the leafy hair that the original Pokemon has. Now, after seeing the photos of this, I knew I had to recreate it using the same Bamboo Lab terracotta filament, which, this is not an advertisement for Bamboo Lab, but I wish they were paying me. Overall, I think this is a really creative adaptation of the Pokemon itself, using the tail and feet for supports, and instead of modeling and making other people print out the most complicated part, the leaves on top, which no doubt would have been a pain to do, instead turning it into a planter and letting the planted plant serve as the leaves was a genius idea, I thought. Plus, the heavy body and the splayed legs and tail make it really stable, which is important if you're going to put a heavy plant and water-laden soil up top. Also, the use of fuzzy skin legitimately makes it look like terracotta from far away. But while that is a great idea visually, you really don't want any fuzzy skin affecting the connector pieces at all. Since A, that way you won't have as much control on the tolerance of the actual pieces, and B, they won't be able to sit flush with each other because there are little bumpies in the way. So this is how you can get rid of that without having to use blocker objects. So first, turn the fuzzy skin setting to none, and then go up here to the fuzzy skin paint tool. Now, if we use the paint bucket tool, it might turn the whole thing fuzzy, which is not what we want. So we're going to adjust this first slider here, sorry, I don't know what it's called in English, until it only selects the faces we want. And then we can click and paint everything else to be fuzzy that we actually want to be fuzzy. Now, in Bamboo Studio, there's no option to turn on fuzzy skin for everything and then just paint blockers on the surfaces you don't want to be fuzzy like you can do with supports. So this is going to have to do for now. Now, fortunately, the fuzzy skin didn't prevent me from putting these pegs into their holes. Unfortunately, there were other issues during assembly. For one thing, this tiny, delicate leaf thing would not go into the hole, potentially due to issues regarding fuzzy skin. But either way, when you have a piece as delicate as this one, you really don't want to force the user to shove it into a hole because it's just really easy to break doing that. I'd say just let it set in loosely and then ask the user to glue it. I had to just give up, cut the peg off, and glue the part into the hole because I was pushing so hard I was going to break it if I didn't. Also, because the peg is round, there's no way to know exactly what orientation you're supposed to put it in, so you kind of just have to guess. It would have been much more helpful if the peg was like an isosceles triangle or something where you couldn't put it in the wrong way. Also, the neck pieces and the peg between them can be put on in such a way that it's only slightly off. So it might be possible for someone to put it on and glue it together without realizing that it's just a little bit wrong. The instructions do mention it a bit, but I wish it would make it crystal clear that that was the case so that people would know to pay extra attention to it. Another way to fix this is just to put another tiny peg next to the big one to kind of force the user to line up both of them so it makes sure that they put it on the right way. Now, finally, and this is more of the horticulturalist in me speaking than anything else, I do wish that there were drain holes in the bottom of the pot and that there was a small removable pot that you could put your plant into. I'm glad the entire neck can be removed, but given how little connection there is between the pot and the neck piece, you really need to glue it. So that means if you want to swap your plant out, you need to take the entire neck off and deal with that. So I feel it would be way easier if there was just a separate pot you could put in to swap the plant out if you please. I personally whipped up a rough one in Bamboo Studio by inserting a cylinder, scaling it appropriately, and then printing it with base mode, but I definitely want to print a proper one that fits snugly in the cup up top. As for drain holes, they just help prevent your plant from drowning if you overwater it or if it's out in the rain. I think it would be super cool if there was like a hole down the neck and the tail where the water could drain out, but I think I'm going a little bit overboard on that one, so sorry. So anyway, it feels pretty sturdy, but will it survive the cat test? Yeah, mostly. I mean, the tail did pop off, unfortunately, but structurally, it's pretty good. Overall, this is a lovely model. It is super creative and functional too. I know it has its issues, of course, but it seems like the vast majority of entries in this contest also had some pretty big ones. So I think this is a proper fit for the grand prize. So congratulations, Shadow Dio-sama. You have won a $40 or regional equivalent Bamboo Lab gift card, except that it was brought to my attention that apparently Maker World has recently locked Bamboo Lab gift cards so you can no longer redeem a code with points and give them to someone else. So I'll have to PayPal you the money or something. I don't know. I'll reach out. We'll get you your prize. Oh, and I happened to show a picture to my mother and she said, quote, "My compliments to the artist." So you're a winner in my mother's eyes too. Congratulations. So, that is a wrap on the second Pumpkin Jam. Holy cow. Congratulations again to Shadow Dio-sama. I hope you enjoy your prize. But before I close out on this video, I just have a couple more things that I need to talk about. Namely, the feedback on this jam and what that means for future jams. After the pumpkin jam concluded, I sent out a survey to everyone that signed up. It essentially asked if they participated or not, and if they didn't, why not? And if they did, they got a lot of, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you agree with this statement type questions. 3 of the 6 participants responded to the survey, and 2 of the 5 non-participants did. Now, if you really want to see the full results, I'll link to the survey in the description below for all of the anonymous answers. However, I did want to highlight a few things here. In general, the most positively received part of the jam was the tutorial video. And given that one of the main pillars of the jam is education, I was really pleased to hear that. People that weren't even able to participate. 10,000 steps. Anyway, people that weren't even able to participate noted that because they were still sent the theme with the tutorial video, they still got something out of the jam, even if they didn't have the time to model anything. Which takes me to the next part. Compared to the last jam, which literally just had participants modeling a coin, this time the theme took a little bit too, well, long to complete. Now, I knew that it was definitely going to be a step up in intensity from the last one, but I thought since everybody was getting the same theme, it would be fine. But the fact of the matter is, even if you're not spending a lot of time modeling details on your design, it still takes a lot of time to print something that big, which means that you probably aren't going to have much, if any, time to fix obvious mistakes that come up during printing. And I'm sure you've noticed this if you've watched the video up until this point, but that resulted in a lot of people releasing models that were kind of unfinished, which, yes, isn't technically unfair because everyone had the same problem, but that just doesn't feel good for anyone involved. So if you're a rules lawyer, you may have realized that I was a little bit more lenient on enforcing the exact letter of the law of the theme this time. Last time it was just coins. You can't really mess that up. But this time I was saying that there needs to be at least 3 parts in a row that's over this length, or you can take your print volume but only one dimension and multiply it by. And as much as I tried to write it to be as digestible as possible, I think it's best if next time I don't try to do something so crazy. I probably should have just said, hey, make a model that's at least 2 pieces and over X millimeters in length. I was trying to get everybody to do something grand, but at the end of the day, I think if a participant wants to not do something grand and still participate, they should have the right to do that. The jam is supposed to be accessible after all. So rest assured, while I of course will not be giving away any of the specifics of the next Pumpkin Jam's theme, and there will be a next Pumpkin Jam, I can promise that it will allow for a lot more freedom in the size and scope of the model you create. So if you want to make a crazy huge one, you absolutely can, but if you just want to make a tiny simple one, you absolutely can as well. Moving on, as I mentioned before, the first pillar of the Pumpkin Jam is education, and I think I did a good job with that. The second is motivation, and as I managed to get 6 people to participate and upload a brand new model to all of their accounts, I'm pretty satisfied with that one as well. However, the third is connection. And while I did get a few people chatting in my Discord server, and I heard some whispers about some of the participants checking out some of the other ones' models, I don't think I did this one as well. On the survey, the statement that the responders agreed with the least was, and I quote, "I got to meet other creators during the jam." So while I do have a section of my Discord that is dedicated specifically for the Pumpkin Jam, I'm not sure what effective ways there are or that I could do to get people to meet each other more. Hopefully that will improve as there are more participants and more regulars, but if you have any suggestions, I would love to hear them. Now, lastly, about the next Pumpkin Jam. I definitely will be doing it, but I guarantee you it will not be until the next calendar year, sometime during 2026. The interest form, however, is open if you so wish. Head on to my website, link in the description below if you are interested. I already got 3 people signed up. I am also at the point where I am looking for sponsors. For context, I had pretty much zero help from outside parties in running this entire thing. Writing the rules, coming up with the theme, creating advertising materials, getting the word out, managing signups, emailing people, recording this video, judging all the models. You get the idea. It was all me. And while at this point in time I am fine with doing that, I did have to break down during the jam and buy filament with my money instead of Maker World points, which I haven't had to do in months. So that kind of sucked. So if anyone knows any business or individual who would resonate with what I'm doing here and would be willing to sponsor either the prize for the winner or the filament for myself to print out all the models, I would love to hear about it. So email me, carlthepumpkinman@gmail.com, please. And if you want to know what you can do yourself to support the Pumpkin Jam, the absolute best thing you can do is to tell your friends about it, tell your enemies about it, tell people about it, and get them to sign up. And honestly, if you want to support me monetarily directly, you can do so using my Ko-Fi or my Maker World memberships. Links to those in my description. Or if you want to support me, but you can't or don't want to do so financially, you can do so by printing, liking, checking out, and boosting my models on MakerWorld. The reward points there are what I use to pay for most, if not all, of my 3D printing supplies. So, with all that being said, if you have made it this far, thank you for watching the entire video. It really means a lot to me. Feel free to leave any questions, comments, and or concerns down below. But until then, I will see you next time. Bye!